Today, on I'll Tell You All About It, we dive into the fascinating and chilling story written by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. In the middle of a frozen sea on a voyage to the North Pole, Captain Walton and his crew find themselves hundreds of miles from land, trapped among icebergs. At a distance, they spot a sleigh pulled by dogs carrying a shadow of human form, but of immense size. The next day, as Walton is writing a letter, his men call him to the deck and he discovers a man floating among the chunks of ice. He lies on the verge of death next to his sleigh, pulled by a single surviving dog. The captain asks the man to board the ship to save his life, and the stranger replies with a foreign accent. "Before I come on board," he said, "would you be so kind as to tell me where you are heading?" Walton is astonished by the dying man's response. His name is Victor Frankenstein. After 2 days babbling in the cabin where his wounds were being tended, Frankenstein speaks to Walton. He tells him he is in search of a man, that he is fleeing from him. Walton replies that the night before they rescued him, they saw a sleigh. As the days pass, Walton and Victor become friends, and Frankenstein tells him his entire life story. He recounts his indulged childhood, raised by a wealthy family in his native Switzerland. When Victor was 4 years old, his father received a letter from his brother-in-law, who told him that his sister had passed away and that he would be remarrying. He asked him to adopt Elizabeth, his sister's daughter. The girl would receive all of her mother's possessions. Victor's father traveled to Italy and, from that day on, took charge of the girl. Victor said that Elizabeth became his playmate and friend. She was calm and good-natured, yet as playful as a summer insect. Her hazel eyes, though as lively as a bird's, possessed a lovely sweetness. Her figure was light and airy, and though she was capable of enduring fatigue and hardship, she seemed the most fragile creature in the world. When Victor turns 17, his father informs him that he will study at a university in Germany. One day before he is to leave, Elizabeth falls ill with scarlet fever. Victor's mother ignores the quarantine and cares for her darling girl. Though Elizabeth survives, Victor's mother becomes infected and falls ill. Before she dies, she tells Victor and Elizabeth that her dream is for the two of them to marry. Frankenstein travels to the university and presents his credentials to the professors, particularly to Mr. Krempe, a professor of natural philosophy. At the university, Frankenstein devotes himself to the study of natural mysteries with the aim of finding the essence of life. 2 years pass without him returning to Geneva. He has earned the admiration of his teachers by improving machines to pump blood, capture lightning, and restore breath. Frankenstein thinks it is time to return to his hometown, but a discovery stops his return. Little by little, and through various experiments, Victor finds the principle of life. He dedicates all his hours to the discovery and devises a horrifying experiment to which he applies himself without regard for hardship or exhaustion. Rather, Victor feels a depraved enthusiasm. He begins to build a creature of gigantic stature, a being about 8 feet tall. He thinks that by creating a new species, he will be blessed as its creator and source of life, and many happy and wonderful beings will owe their existence to him. Frankenstein works in secret, walking at midnight among moldy, unhallowed graves or torturing living animals to instill life into inert clay. With the parts of men and animals, his repugnant creature takes shape. One rainy November night, he places the necessary machinery around it to give a spark of existence to this being. When Frankenstein looks at his living creature, he can feel nothing but sorrow for that disaster. Its yellowish, watery eyes stare at him, its skin transparent over dark veins, its black and greasy hair, the eye sockets that sink expressionlessly with parchment-like face, and those black, cracked lips. The feeling of success had vanished for Victor. Instead, horror and disgust fill his heart and leave him breathless. He leaves his experimental room and wanders the streets in a feverish state. He cannot return to his room. It seems as though he is fleeing from his ghastly creature. When our troubled protagonist enters an inn, he meets Clerval, a friend from his childhood. He greets him joyfully, but Frankenstein is completely distraught. His friend helps him compose himself. He spends several days with a fever and nausea. He then recovers and introduces Clerval to his university teachers. Winter arrives, which Victor deeply regrets because he receives the news of his younger brother William's murder. He decides to return home. On the outskirts of Geneva, a flash of lightning illuminates the forest, and Victor clearly sees its gigantic form and a deformity of its appearance, more frightful than anything human. It was the Fiend. Victor thinks that this repulsive demon whom he had brought to life might be his brother's murderer. He thinks of stopping and chasing it, but it would have been useless. He saw it climbing a rocky mountain peak. Mary Shelley was born in Somerstown, London in 1797. The daughter of the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft and the philosopher William Godwin, she was invited at the age of 19 by Lord Byron to a villa in Geneva. There, the guests were challenged to write a supernatural story, and it was in this setting that Mary began writing her most famous novel, Frankenstein. Shelley can be described as a brilliant intellectual who, with her novel, inaugurated the science fiction genre. Frankenstein's carriage arrives home. 5 years have passed since he left. He is reunited with his father and with Elizabeth. A servant girl named Justine had been accused of being William's killer, but Victor knew in his heart it was the creature. A trial is held in which Elizabeth always believed in Justine's innocence, but in the end, the accused confesses to the murder and loses her life. Victor sees the noble sentiments of his cousin in her suffering and feels like a monster himself, because after all, he had given life to the depraved creature that deprived a sweet child of life. Days later, Elizabeth and Victor go on an excursion with a guide to Mount Blanc. At the top of the mountain, Frankenstein meets his abominable creation. The Fiend confronts its creator. "You hate and reject me, your creature, to whom you are bound by ties that will only be undone with the death of one of us. Fulfill your duty to me, and I will fulfill mine to you." Frankenstein listens as his creature tells its wretched story. It tells him how it fled from people who rejected and chased it for the misery of its form and limbs, how it slept in the woods, the ice, and the grottos which it did not fear, how it loved life despite being miserable. The creature, which had been created taller, stronger, and more agile than its creator, warned that if Victor did not fulfill his promise, it would destroy all of Frankenstein's loved ones. The monster had awakened in the laboratory without understanding or knowing how to use its senses. It then escaped into the forest where it ate fruits. Winter came and it entered a hut where the person who saw it ran away in terror at its appearance. Days later, it visited a village, but people chased it with stones and sticks for being so ugly. Thus, the creature became afraid of people. The monster then took refuge in a barn. A family lived next door, and by listening to them, it learned to communicate and to love them and to want to be a part of them. It was a sad and unfortunate family. The monster also learned to read and found a journal that Frankenstein had left in his coat, and so it learned about how it was born. One day, it decided to speak with the father of the farming family, who was blind. At first, everything went kindly, but when the rest of the family arrived, they chased away the grotesque creature, leaving it sad and alone. Then, on its way to Geneva, the creature found a small youth and thought that this youth was not mature enough to hate him, so it decided to kidnap him to be his friend. But the boy screamed and resisted, and upon realizing that the child was related to Victor, it killed him and framed Justine, who was sleeping in a barn, by leaving William's locket next to her. After finishing its tale, the monster made its demand to the creator. "You must create a companion for me, a female with whom I can live, who will understand me and whom I can understand, so that I can exist." Frankenstein absolutely refused. How could he create another evil creature? To which the monster replied that it is only evil because it is miserable. If it had someone who loved it, it would be good. Victor was moved and made the creature promise that if he agreed, it would stay away from people, leave Europe, and go into the wilds of America. The fiend accepted, and Victor dedicated himself to the task of making a companion as monstrous as his infamous creation. Many months passed in which Frankenstein regained his enthusiasm in Geneva. His father even asked him to marry his cousin Elizabeth, as this union would be his strength in his old age. Victor then remembered the promise he had made to the fiend and promised Elizabeth that before they married, he had to take a journey with the hidden purpose of fulfilling his promise to the creature, whom he feared could kill everything he held most dear. He first traveled to London, where he acquired scientific and medical equipment. Then, in a poor village in Scotland, he rented a cabin and spent his mornings immersed in his disgusting task. He worked for months, saddened by the horror of his work, but made significant progress. One afternoon, he reflected on the consequences of his work. Maybe the creature had promised not to approach humans, but the new being he was creating had made no such promise. And what if the woman he created rejected the creature? Would this not make it more miserable? What if they fought or reproduced and populated the earth with monstrous fiends that would doom future human generations to destruction? Frankenstein felt the presence of the creature. It had followed him through the moors, forests, and cities, waiting for its reward. Victor then made up his mind and began to destroy his new creation. The monster watched from a window and saw him destroy the creature in which he had placed the happiness of his future existence, and, with a shriek of fiendish despair and revenge, it left. Then our protagonist receives a letter from his friend Henry, whom he goes to see in Ireland. When he arrives, he learns that he has been murdered and that he is being framed for the crime. He manages to prove his innocence, but knows that the monster has committed the murder as a form of revenge. Victor returns to Geneva and marries Elizabeth. That same wedding night, a storm rises. At a moment when Elizabeth leaves the room and while Victor is lying down, he hears a scream that fades away. Going in search of Elizabeth, the best person in the world, Victor discovers her pale and lifeless. His deepest fears had come true. The devilish creature he had created had taken from him what he held most dear. From that day on, Frankenstein's heart was filled with hatred and a desire for revenge, and he began to pursue his creation to kill it. His glow of hatred did not stop because of the distances he had to travel, or because of exhaustion, or because of fear. His only goal in life was to destroy his own creation. The pursuit of the devilish fiend had led Frankenstein to the North Pole, where he had been rescued by Walton. There, wounded, he spent several weeks trying to recover. One afternoon, when the ship was set to return to England, Victor died. Walton mourned the death of the wretched man who had become his friend, and later saw with astonishment in the cabin where the coffin lay an immense, grotesque figure with horrifying features that looked at Walton with contempt and indifference. The monster was affected by the death of its creator. They were united by life and by death. The creature had suffered its whole life, and although it believed itself to have been made with love and understanding, it could not bear that the one who had given it life and denied it happiness could be happy. The huge and sad fiend took the inert body of its creator in its arms and left the ship, disappearing into the white desert of ice, never to be seen by any man again. and this was the chilling fantasy invented by Mary Shelley over 200 years ago. Do you believe that the concerns the novel conveys about the dangers of scientific research are relevant today? Has a work or action you've performed ever turned against you? Do you consider evil to be something people are born with, or is it circumstances that inspire it? Tell me all your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to help me, give us a like and subscribe to the channel, as that is necessary to keep uploading stories. I also wrote a book, and like Victor Frankenstein, I hope the success of my work turns against me. If you want to support me by purchasing it, the details are in the description. A hug, and until next time.